What is up, my Lorcana Goons, and welcome back to the Lorcana Goons channel. You're watching the Quest with a Guest podcast, where Zach and I team up with some fellow Illumineers to talk about the Lorcana metagame. This week, we're going to hang out with John and Shane, part of Team Goons, and the first thing I got to ask, guys, is what were you doing, where were you when you find out about the Hiram Flavorsham ban?
You guys playing this cash tournament in my backyard this weekend?
You're just sitting there, you're just chilling, and then all of a sudden you went all in, and you're like, "No, I gotta take that back." Actually, hold on, Hiram just got banned.
Hold up, we can't. Hold up, we can't play this card anymore. I was
I'm kind of bummed I can't play, but I'm a little less bummed now that, given the situation.
Not gonna lie, I was taking a nap after walking my dog and going to the gym in the morning. I was like, I'm gonna take a quick nap real quick before I do the things I have to do. And then Zach just called me, and his actual first words were, have you seen the ban list? And I thought he was just lying. And I was like, no, I haven't seen anything about it. And then he's like, all right, I'm not gonna tell you nothing about it. If you want to get on camera and record about it, get your genuine reaction. So that was pretty awesome. And so my reaction was literally on camera. And
Sound any different?
yeah. What about you, Zach? What were you doing?
Well, I saw the news in our group chat. Our good buddy Din Confom actually just said they just banned Hiram, and I would see his like tweets. He would also mention in our group chat as well. He went on and on about how they should be banning Hiram, or it should be the play, and he's like, well, they actually just did it, and Fortisphere, and I'm like, huh? I already knew I can go on Twitter and find the news, and it was like the first thing after I refreshed my my little explore page, and yeah, it was a shocker to actually see. But overall, yeah, my thoughts on the bans were just like, if they were going to actually do this, it shouldn't have taken an effect right away. It's a little strange for it to happen immediately. Although I think other card games kind of follow the same suit nowadays, where like bans will just take effect almost the next day. Which would make sense, because they might be thinking about doing this for a while. But Red Blue or Blue Steel also didn't have too much time to shine. Sure, Red Blue has a DLC win, but it wasn't like the supposed best deck of the format until we saw the release of the Tamatoa clam.
What about you, Jonathan? The reason I asked both of them too, by the way, is because Jonathan and Shane are both Sapphire enjoyers as of like the most recent meta. I mean, you guys can play pretty much any deck, I'm sure, but I know you guys were really, really grinding with the Sapphire Ruby. And Jonathan Martinez in particular, you got your invite to Nationals to the LCQ with Sapphire Ruby. So how did you feel, especially with the RIP, my toy maker background?
Yeah, I'll say you kind of jinxed it there, Kevin, because that's the day you asked if we could be on the podcast to talk about the meta, and then my phone just started blowing up from some discords I'm in, and I looked at it and it was the ban. I was like, oh, okay, well, that kind of sucks.
Yeah.
And I was talking to Zach. I was like, I don't think it was warranted right now because there's no big events. But it happened. It sucks.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned that there's no big events. We have no DLCs to really worry about. I guess Set Champs is like the biggest thing that's official that's happening. So, in general, like I do think there was like merit to the idea of the conversation. Like, is this card too good for tournament play, right? But I was pretty surprised too, for a variety of reasons. Like one, I didn't think we'd ever get a ban list. I thought they were just gonna do like errata stuff, rotation stuff, etc. And then like you said, Zach, they didn't even give us any leeway time. Like if you want to play this weekend, you just can't play a Flavorsham anymore. Which is something that I'm not used to in any other card game I've played. They usually give like at least a month or something of time for you guys to like adjust to the meta, sell your cards. I kind of liked it though, because like immediately I was like, oh cool, I can like play online and no one's gonna have the card anymore, so we're just immediately into this meta. But like obviously one of the biggest things I want to empathize with is the idea that a lot of people probably spent money on their decks, their Sapphire decks, their Tamatoa being one of the most expensive card in the set now. I'm pretty sure, I haven't checked the price today, but I know Zach, you checked it and you said it wasn't looking too good for the Tamatoas. $50, that's not bad. I mean, it's still up there, right? It's still a hit from the set, but just from a perspective of like market wise, like, oh, this is crazy because this is like one of the best sets of the format, and a lot of it had to do with the Sapphire cards that were in there, and I know people are giving up on Sapphire, which I don't think you should. Just right off the bat, like I think the decks, the color is still more than playable and reasonable. But what do you guys think? Where do you guys think Sapphire lands now? With no consistent Pot of Greed draw to engine.
Well, I think it would be silly to say that Sapphire is unplayable. It still has some incredibly powerful cards, and I think they put that into their thought process of banning Fortisphere over Popsicle, because I think if Popsicle was in fact banned, then effectively Sapphire would be in a lot of trouble. Because if you look at the design space that they're centering on with Sapphire in particular, I know they did explain steel isn't really an item color. They don't want it to be an item focused color. Sapphire very much is, and a lot of the cards don't function particularly well if you were to eliminate a card like Popsicle. So I think it still has some things going for it, particularly when you look at cards like Sail and Tipo. I know those are ubiquitous with Sapphire. I think those are two of the strongest cards in the game still. So there's ways to abuse them. Now, obviously, the best thing before to ramp into generally, particularly when you were on the play, was Hiram, because it would snowball out of control. But in a lot of cases, Hiram wasn't the best thing to do if you were on the draw. So I think there's ways to maneuver around that. It's going to take some time to figure it out, what the best version of Sapphire Ruby looks like going forward. But I think it'll still be a part of the metagame.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's just now that Sapphire doesn't have Hero, we do lose a bit of consistency in card draw. So just kind of figuring out, all right, where do we go from here? What type of build are we going to do? I know a lot of people are wanting to play DKP's list just because he didn't really need Hiram for the most part. But I think there are other options out there. I'm currently testing 3 different decks, and we're trying to see which would be the best build. But I completely agree with Popsicle. Like, I think Popsicle, like if they were to ban Popsicle, it would hurt Blue Steel and Blue Red the most. To the point where I don't think it's even tier 2. Right now, I still think Blue Red is tier 1 deck.
Oh yeah, no, I agree. I've been seeing people's sentiment about banning Popsicle, and I think that's ridiculous. If you ban Popsicle, then I think Sapphire just borderline becomes unplayable. Because I think one of the best things about Popsicle is that it acts as a pseudo draw engine. You can play it, one cause draw a card, you can get rid of it, and next turn you can play Happy as a Clam. You grab 2 of them back, and that's kind of like drawing 2 again. You have to pay the extra ink, which is I think more than fair in a deck like you just said, Shane, that plays Tipo and Sail. One of the things about like ramp and the abilities of like ramp strategies is that they're going to be inevitable in card games, and they're not necessarily unfair, but I think to an extent, what I disliked about the Sapphire strategy in this recent format was that it completely made like any card that costs more than 5 just irrelevant. Like it just felt like you couldn't play anything that costs more than 5 in a deck that doesn't play blue. You know what I mean? Like every single card that came out that was like really good but costs 6 or more, immediately I thought, well, if you can't ramp into this, you just can't play this card. Because everyone's just ramping into like B Prep and Maleficent Dragon and Big Sisu, which is fine. But really, the issue was after you're done ramping and you've got these boss cards and you have like the highest amount of ink on the board, you could just keep drawing cards, you know. And there wasn't many outs to Flaversham. But yeah, bans in general. Zach Stone, how do you feel about the idea of a ban list in Lorcana now?
Well, I think at one it's important, but the other thought to have is to like if they're gonna have ban lists, like are we going to have are we just gonna have like emergency bans? Because this is what I think this one felt like the most. It only changed 2 things, and it literally just completely banned cards, which in the card game I'm coming from, that looks like an emergency ban. Like you have to do it because people are drastically, like or you would have to do it because drastically the game itself will not be playable or competitively fun if like every single person that does well is consistently playing like these colors. Like we saw in the past like few weeks where like all the good players shifted to like blue decks and we saw all the blue decks do well. And I think that's something to also kind of take away, is that like, what if these good players play different colors? Like, what if they played other decks? Would they still have the same success, or would they lose to the blue decks? And I feel like we saw in the SSG, or yeah, I think we saw in one of the tournaments that the Chernodog deck got like top 8 in like a 60-70 person tournament.
Yeah,
So
it was
there
the
is,
I think it was the Southside Gaming one, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, and then it was both days,
yeah, I think it
Saturday
was
and Sunday.
Ghosty.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah,
It was Ghosty that did it too. So basically, there was still options to play other decks, but I feel like a lot of the better players in this game shifted to a blue strategy, which sort of made the color look very oppressive. And that, again, to add to what Jonathan mentioned earlier, is that they didn't get its time to shine. Like, there was no big events for these decks to actually play in. Like, if we had DLCs, or if we had something to play for, I think that these bans would have actually created an interesting like shift into like what people want to play. But without the events, so there's nothing to really like play for. Like, we're considering even playing in like the bigger tournaments on the east side, because we're all West Coast boys here, to just get some competitive Lorcana in.
Yeah, we all want to play more, obviously. With or without Hiram, unfortunately, we would love to play it with at least Jonathan and I. But it is what it is. I think in the long run, bans are a better way to go than an errata. I think an errata can go one of two ways. You can go the Bucky route, where they made multiple changes to effectively make it unplayable as far as competitive players are concerned. But that also required distributing new versions of the card, and it can also be confusing to new players who might open an old pack and get the older version and think, "Wow, this card's really good," and then have to be heartbroken that they can't actually play their card. With Hiram, it's unique because correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's in a pre-constructed deck. Um, I know Magic the Gathering's made some exceptions in the past. They too have banned cards that came in pre-constructed decks, and they said, well, actually, you can still play the pre-constructed deck in a tournament if you want to, if it's exactly that configuration. I don't anticipate that Lorcana will make that exception because, quite frankly, I don't think anyone is clamoring to do that. But if you really wanted to play Hiram, that would be a funny thing if they decided to do something like that. But I think long term, bans is the best way to go. As far as the timing of it, obviously it was kind of random. But that can go one of both ways also. Speaking of my experience in Magic the Gathering, sometimes they have scheduled banned and restricted announcements, right? But that has its own detriments as well, because if you know that the ban list is coming in a month and you know that it's likely Hiram is going to be banned, then basically the whole metagame shifts, kind of predicting the ban, or there's a lot of market things that might happen. It creates its own mess. And what if the banned and restricted announcement isn't for 3 months? Let's say it's quarterly, and Hiram is a problem now. Like, everyone's just kind of waiting on a metagame that they know is messy. So there's pros and cons to every approach, I think. And even though it looks like an emergency ban optically, I have a feeling they've been thinking about this one for a while.
Yeah, I wonder why you guys are talking. I was thinking, like, would the reaction be even worse if there was a DLC coming up? That I'm thinking about, like, people investing in this
Yeah.
deck and now DLC, and now they're like, I just bought a bunch of Tamatoas.
Dude, someone the other day was like, I just picked up my Hirams like 3 weeks ago. I'm like, oh no.
yeah. No,
Yeah.
in our Discord, I believe it was Togepi. Like, he had an eBay email saying like, did you did you rate your order, and it was 4 cold foil Hiram Flavor Shams.
Well,
my
if
God.
you, I don't know if you guys have talked about. I know you do the market watch. If you've talked about Sheriff of Nottingham yet,
I did.
but I
We
know
talked
that
about it on
spiked over
Monday.
the weekend based
Yeah.
on some results. And anybody who bought those over the weekend, they're probably still waiting for them in the mail, and they're not going to be very useful.
Yeah, I did see that. I saw Zansai post his list on Twitter. And then yeah, on Monday I looked up the pricing, and like the Dawn foils were still cheap, but all the foils were just gone. There was no foils
Yeah.
left, and they were selling for like $10, $15 at like as the highest. And Yeah, like you were saying, they're not gonna get those cards for a minute. And it's this is more of like just trying to lighten the situation why I'm giggling about this, just because like I know that people definitely have to spend their hard-earned money on this game, and I think that could be really polarizing. I know one of the big reasons why I super dislike Yu-Gi-Oh is because of the way they do their ban list. And Yu-Gi-Oh does this really big thing where they release like extremely overpowered like archetype engines, and then like within 5-6 months they're just banned. But staples just come and go, you know what I mean? And Flavor Champ felt more like a staple, did not feel like an archetype engine or anything, didn't feel like it was something that needed to go immediately, because quite frankly, like I don't think there was a problem in the meta. Like I think Sapphire Ruby's a great deck. I just think you have to really like build the strategy around it. I think the issue was though that like you're either playing your deck to beat Sapphire or you're playing Sapphire at this point, and a
Yes.
lot of that had to do with like I think the stat line of Flaversham, the 1/6, like the 1/6 was insane, because the only way to like stop Flaversham was really you play Ruby, like you play a Ruby color, or if you're playing steel, you have to have two cards. And outside of that, like you really that limits your color combos. You know, you can't really. I guess you could play like I guess you could play Cloud Kicker or something like that, but that doesn't really stop the problem. You know, like the Emerald engine is very powerful, but bouncing Flaversham doesn't do anything in that sense. Amethyst does not have a way to clear it. You can exert Flaversham, and you have to have like a weird combination of cards like pre Elsa. You know what I mean? And even then, like they're ramping into it. So when they're on 4 ink, you're barely on 3 ink type beat. So that was my issue with it, is that there wasn't enough outs to get rid of a card like Flowershem immediately in the color pool. And I think that is also where the problem was for me. Like I think if they would have eroded it, like I agree with you, by the way, Shane. I think erodas aren't necessarily the most fun thing, because like you said, it's always awkward to have to explain to people like, oh, that card isn't set anymore. You got to print more copies of the card. I really don't think Ravensburger wants to do that. So yeah, like the ban I think is interesting for that reason. But yeah, the 6 willpower really is. If they would have made it a 4 willpower, 5 willpower, I do think that it would have been a much more fair card. But that's not to say that they can't do something like what One Piece does. Like One Piece will re-release cards that have been put on a ban list, and they just kind of make them less powerful. So there's a world where we do see Flaversham come back in like 2 sets from now or something, but instead he has the same effect, different artwork, but he's a 1/4. And I think as a 1/4 would be a lot more fair, even. You know, what do you guys think?
Yeah, I think I was testing against Andrew last night in different decks, and he was trying the blue steel with Oswald and Sheriff. And it was really slow early on, and I felt like whenever I played Hiram against blue steel, I know it's safe just because of that 6 toughness. Like I know I'm gonna be questing, and so I'm gonna draw 4 for sure. So when we're playing, it was a little slower because I was doing a workshop build, but it still was able to get on top. So and I was playing on the draw, so it's just I lost some consistency without having Hiram. But it's not to say that it's still not a bad deck.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jonathan, that as someone who played both Sapphire Steel and Sapphire Ruby in this meta game, the reason more recently I was playing Sapphire Ruby was specifically because against opposing Hirams, it just had a much easier time banishing them. So with things like Sisu and Brawl and in that regard. And that was part of the reason that I think Blue Red was so good, was particularly because it could also beat Hiram. It was the Hiram deck that could beat other Hirams.
Yeah, the only Hiram deck
and
that could beat other Hirams, right?
yes, exactly. And yeah, most
No
decks
respect
aren't
on
very
blue
well.
green. Got it, Kevin.
Most other decks are not very well equipped to deal with a Hiram that hasn't already gained a ton of value, like you guys mentioned. So I think that in and of itself tells you something about the Lorcana design space, that the removal just isn't very efficient. If you're not singing a song, like Strength of a Raging Fire is arguably the best removal spell in the game because it's a song, right? If it wasn't a song, then we wouldn't be saying that. It'd be pretty similar to Brawl overall. And Brawl is very inefficient, even though it's a card that you have to play 4 of if you're playing a Ruby deck in general, primarily because of things like Diablo. But the other colors just don't have a lot of ways to banish characters without them already being exerted. Like we see Amethyst with things like Elsa, and in previous metagames, we were playing cards like Pinocchio, right? To try and banish characters before they got value, particularly. So I wonder if that'll change in the future, if the removal will get more efficient, because right now that's not how Lorcana has been designed. If you look at a card like Dragonfire, like if you're Dragonfiring a 2-drop, for example, like a Mr. Smee, that feels really bad. Obviously, Brawl came out and that feels a little better, but you can't even Brawl Mr. Smee. You have to have a coil in the mix, right? So I wonder if in the future there's more efficient removal, if they'll ever consider unbanning Hiram. Is that an option? And we don't know long term. Is it? Because sometimes things get put on the ban list and the metagame and the context changes, right? Because if you look at the ban list in an abstract, Fortisphere doesn't really make any sense. But if you look at it in the context of this specific metagame, it does make some sense. So I think maybe they revisit in the future. And one thing I want to add also is I think we could see a rotation and multiple formats in the future. So in the future, is there a world where the average Lorcana card is a little stronger, maybe the removal is a little more efficient, and you're working with an entire card pool that's maybe double what it is now? Can Hiram come back in that environment? Maybe.
And yeah, I even think that there's a world where like Hiram can probably just be like a one of, as a limited card. You can only have that one copy. It'll also make some interesting decisions, because in this game we have a mulligan. So if you have for have a limited card and you mulligan, or you're starting your hand and you find it in your opening hand, are you still going to mulligan it away for other things? Are you still only going to keep it in combination with what you want it, or do you just take the chance of never thinking you'll never find this card again and having to keep it in your opener? And I think that's going to be some things that, if were to happen in this game, would actually, I think, make it better. I wish Hiram didn't get banned. I wish Hiram either went to 1 or 2. Not even because like I'm a blue player. Like I've been only playing blue green recently, and I started in this format with Sapphire Steel. It's just because I feel like that that's a card, even though it had it creates a lot of pressure when it hits play. Ruby is the only color that can officially remove it with just like one card by that early on. I still think it was fine to exist, but for it to be completely banned, it does seem like it's pretty drastic. But if they've had this thought for a while and they only recently did it, maybe there's a world where like we'll actually have announcements soon about some events. Maybe this is like news that's building up to something bigger. We'll see, because there's a lot of talk in the space about rotation, reprints. I know a lot of people are a little are anticipating the Fabled set, which is coming after Reign of Jafar, and they haven't given us a lot of information about it yet. But we should be seeing some more live streams and some more some more like advertisement into this product soon, with what Ravensburger has recently stated in the official like Lorcana Discord. And I'm pretty excited about it. And I really love the fact that Steve Warner took to a Q&A and pretty much answered the public into why they made these decisions, which I think is very important, because I left a lot of us confused when we first just saw the 2 cards being banned. And I even think, I remember, Kevin, when I sent you that link and you recorded genuinely that information wasn't on that post yet. And we still didn't know, why they did such of a ban. And we do know that in the Eastern Hemisphere, like in the Grand Prix, their Hiram is still around. They're still going to be playing with Hiram, and they have their own separate ban list, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned the Steve Warner thing, because he actually also briefly mentioned that they thought this would not be a fun format for the World Tournament. And you mentioned kind of like if they're talking about events anytime soon, and I've said this a couple times, I don't think we're getting DLCs this year. Like, I just don't think we are, especially after rereading, like you said, Zach, the State of the Game press release they made. It's talking about like where they are with the game, what they want to do. Doesn't seem like they're ready to have any more DLCs. Doesn't seem like they want to know how to go about that. I don't know if you guys remember last year, they straight up said, we're going to have fan events for people who aren't competitive, and we haven't seen any of that, So they said a lot of stuff that hasn't been done, and to their credit, they're obviously trying. It's a card game. They're new. It's crazy times right now. I don't blame people um trying to get things going or whatever, and being like really like anxious about like when are the next events, but they did say that they didn't want to have this format for Worlds, so I do think that it's going to be within this or Reign of Jafar, where the World Tournament happens, and hopefully we'll be able to go as like attendees and stuff like that, or maybe there'll be some side events for us too. But that also got me thinking, if we're not going to have the World Tournament specifically for the Arcasia's Island format, I can only imagine what other Sapphire cards they printed in Jafar's reign, where they thought, okay, we have to stop this now, because for all we know, they made even more. For all we know, they made no removal, like Shane was mentioning, for any other colors to deal with this type of card. And they made even better Sapphire cards, which they tend to love to do. Somebody at Ravensburger just loves Sapphire, apparently, because they get everything. And yeah, I would love to see some more removal in this game. That's been one of my like big issues too, is that you literally cannot play a color combination like yellow green, like yellow blue, because there's no removal. Like your removal in Amber is just the idea that you can pop cards with Criminal Mind or a Minnie Mouse, and you have to use really cheesy stuff like support to give support to the opponent, and then you pop it with the Criminal Mind, and that's like a 2 to 3 card combo, just to do the same thing, that a card like Brawl does. You know what I mean? And yeah, Brawl is very inefficient. I want to talk about that too briefly, because like you can literally only use it on the 2 strength or less, and but it's like the perfect way to out him. But no other color combo has a card like that. You know what I mean? Like if they made an Amber card that was somewhat similar, then that would make the playability of a lot of other decks, just like it would increase the playability of a lot of other color combinations. I'm not sure why they've limited like the removal. I mean, I guess I do understand why when we look at like the colors and what they're meant to do and stuff. But I don't think that should limit like the idea that some of the other colors just can't remove things from the board. I don't think if we gave like Amber like a 1 removal card, I don't think it would make Amber Steel overpowered either. You know what I mean?
I don't know about that one then. Amber Steel's got a lot of tools. You said that somebody really likes blue. I would also like to say they like blue, steel, and amber. There's a lot of powerful cards Amber has that, even though they're not like removal based, they essentially are like pressuring the opponent into like removing their own characters to essentially trade with, or they're impossible to remove in just like 1 turn, which I think Daisy Duck's a good example, because that's a card that cannot be answered immediately. It usually takes like a combination of cards to deal with. So there are still some oppressive cards in other colors. Not to say that like Sapphire doesn't have its own form of oppressive cards, but I really think that there's enough of in between all the colors. There's a lot of cards in the card pool that I feel like can swing games just by being played on curve.
And another thing,
Yeah.
real quick, that I want to. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just to say that I think the one thing what I believe that puts blue red into the tier 0 is coil. Like it made Sisu's and Brawl's way better. And I think if there was another card, I'm not sure if you already had this question. Are you going to give us this question, Kev? But if it wasn't Hiram, I think coil and Forest Sphere would have been enough. I think coil is really what I felt just made blue red so good.
I think 2 things that come to mind off the top of my head are Diablo and Whole New World. I think those are cards that are, if they're not already, are going to be on the watch list for Ravensburger going forward. I think they just attack the game on an axis that's difficult to interact with. We just talked about how inefficient removal is, right? So I expect a rise of Diablo. Now, Brawls are still going to be around, but how popular is blue red going to be overall? How popular is the color ruby going to be overall? So then you have to look at something like steel and something like fire the cannons and let the storm rage on. But naturally, Emerald has ways to counteract that with things like Hidden Cove. So there's certain cards. I mean, we've all played either with or against Amber Steel in scenarios where it just feels either unwinnable or unlosable, depending on what side you're on. If they hit the perfect curve into a whole new world, there's not a whole lot of ways to interact with that in certain colors. Now, obviously, Emerald has things like Ursula 2 drop that can snag the song, etc. But this once again circles back to the design space of certain colors aren't able to interact with certain types of threats, whether it's a song, whether it's a character, etc. And I think throughout the game's history, we're now about a year and a half in, we've seen different reigns of different color combinations. If you go all the way to the original first couple of sets, Ruby Amethyst was very dominant, right? Well, Ruby has Be Prepared, so it has a sweeper that other colors don't have access to. And then we've seen a rise of Ruby Sapphire in recent history, but at different points we've seen Amber Steel and Green Steel be quite good. And Steel has removal. So my point is, both Ruby and Steel, for basically the game's history, I've felt obligated to play one of those colors because it's the colors that have the easiest access to remove other characters and interact with the board. And I think that's very unique. Now you look at things like, Kevin, you brought up Sapphire Amber or Blue Yellow. That doesn't have a lot of removal, right? And when we see that it has not had a lot of success in the game's history. Although if you go back to the very first chapter, Blue Yellow was all right. But there weren't a lot of threats that had to be answered immediately, or you would just lose. But right now, I expect Diablo to be that threat in the metagame going forward. But
No. You started talking immediately when Kev asked the question.
oh,
It
that's
was just
funny.
like boom.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, it literally, right when he asked it, you go, "Oh, I was just this weekend I was playing cash game." I'm like, oh, okay.
okay, I'll
Well,
take
no,
part out.
because his camera's off and I couldn't hear
Yeah,
him.
my
so
bad.
I thought we were just chilling.
That's so funny.
No, yeah, my bad. I forgot to mention you won't see me, but I can see you guys, and I have it set up on the OBS. But
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
So I wanted to mention something, bring it back a little bit to what John and what Zach said. First of all, John, you made a really good point about Sapphire Coil being like very powerful in the metagame. It completely stops the idea that you can play cards like Sami, Calhoun, Lawrence, and then Ruby Sapphire can't out them the same way with Big Sisu, but now they can. I thought Sapphire Coil was a decently fair card, but I also wouldn't have been surprised if they put that on the ban list too. But one of the big things I also want to mention is outside of removal being very limited to like Ruby and Steel, like you were saying, Shane, it feels like item removal as well just feels very, very limited to like Steel and Sapphire even, you know what I mean? And like I'm surprised they haven't made a Ruby card that just says like banish an item, because they did, like, Sapphire has a thing, put into your inkwell, Steel has a thing, deal damage or whatever. But like there's no Ruby cards, there's no Amber cards, there's no Emerald cards, and there's no Amethyst cards that remove items realistically. So that's 4 colors from the color pool that cannot deal with any single item. So that's another big issue, I think, too. And I understand that they're trying to keep the colors within this type of like theme and whatnot, but like they can do that. I guess Amethyst has the Mahika D spell that where it bounces back an item to the hand. I think that's so silly. Like that's so bad.
Technically, Poor Unfortunate Souls, like a
that
cost
too.
or less
Yeah,
item,
that
or
too.
Befuddle.
I think that's so terrible. Like that's such a disgrace to like to the idea that like, oh, I'm gonna bounce back your popsicle before you get a flavor sham value, or I'm gonna bounce back your Sapphire. It doesn't make any sense.
They could make a Ruby like action or song where it's like deal 2 damage to your own character and just banish a chosen item.
Yes.
And then like Amethyst one, return chosen character on your side of the field to your hand, banish chosen item.
Yeah.
They could do some stuff that's themed.
Oh, actually, Emerald does. I forgot that Emerald does. Emerald has Set My Heart. But still, they
have
be.
a lot. They have the Clarabelle. The
that
cost.
too. Yeah, and the P, and it was more recently that they started adding those. But it just feels like if you're gonna make crazy cards like Sapphire Coil, you got to make cards in the other color pool that as well. You know what I mean? Because like some people some people should be able to play their like random blue yellow deck and like not just feel like they can't do anything. Like you know what I mean? You should like you don't have to give like blue like or yellow like crazy removal for characters, right? But at least give them something like to deal with the to deal with the metagame. Because I know some people just want to play for fun, and it's genuinely not fun to just sit there and just realize like this color pool has nothing like to deal with this specific like power card that is in every single blue deck, right? And then another thing I wanted to mention, Zach, is you mentioned the idea of like limiting and semi-limiting cards, like putting Hiram to 1 or 2 or something like that. Personally, I've always disliked that from certain games. Like I really hope they don't do that. Like to me, it's like ban the card or don't, because like if there's just one copy of Flaversham in everyone's blue deck, like every time they play that one copy, I'm gonna get so tilted. You know what I mean? And I love Lorcana's mulligan because yeah, you can hard mulligan into it. That's great, but it just feels so lucky, right? Like oh, you drew the one Flaversham in this crazy game state out of the 60 cards in your deck. Like this sucks, you know. And then you start doing that with other cards, like oh, you drew the one B prep. Like congratulations, you know. And it just feels so like polarizing to me. I've always hated that in like Yu-Gi-Oh. For example, like it used to frustrate me so much, especially in Yu-Gi-Oh, because there's no mulligan. So it'd be like, okay, cool. This one card is limited to 1, so I'm gonna start doing my play, and then they interrupt you, and they're like, oh, actually, I have it, and it's just like, wow, like you know, like that feels extremely bad in my opinion. But difference of opinion, you know. I'm sure some people would agree and disagree. But I do want to take some time and start looking at some newer red blue decks and kind of get your guys' opinion on it. So here we have Sailor's deck. If you guys don't know Sailor, he's a very prominent player in the Lorcana community and got his world's invite with Ruby Sapphire. And in my opinion, he's like one of the OGs when it comes to like Sisu on ice, as they like to say, right? A lot of people credit him for pretty much putting the deck on the map. But yeah, we all know the metagame. In particular, Shane and John over here are Ruby Sapphire enjoyers, and I just want to get some quick opinions on how you guys would change this deck without the Flavershams.
Well, it's tough. Like Sapphire is naturally built around 4 drops, right? The ideal start in a Sapphire deck, at least on the play, is to go ramp into a 4 drop, and a lot of times you wanted it to be Popsicle into Hiram. Now it does have an alternate play pattern, particularly with the addition of Coil, with going Coil into either Sisu or Brawl and skipping the ramp part of it. But there's a lot of alternate 4 drops you could play in the spot of Hiram. There's the newer Kita, that basically is how far I'll go on a stick, on a character. You could look at something like that, but you could also go the DKP route and try to lean into something like Manor. The thing with a deck like this is it can run out of resources pretty quickly if you don't specifically have Hiram. So I think it's going to take some time to figure out the best way to go about this. It's certainly not going to be an overnight process because Hiram is irreplaceable. Let's just be frank. So we kind of have to look at it through a different lens and determine what the best route is. Because ultimately, this is also a control deck, right? You're reacting to the metagame. We don't know what the metagame looks like yet. So it's hard to say exactly what the Ruby Sapphire's decks what the best version of Ruby Sapphire will be going forward. It could involve Shark. If you look at this list, there's no Sharks, there's no Manors, so there's a lot of different options to go about it.
Yeah, it's a matter. That's why I have 3 different deck lists, because each of them do something different, right? So without Hiram, that's essentially your card draw. So that's why I have a workshop build to replace Hiram and to provide more of that consistency card draw, but it's slower. So there's that downside. Then there's a Shark build where you just don't really have Hiram. You just instead run more actions. And that one right now seems to be the better build just because it has been tested by DKP. And it's really good against aggro decks. And then the other one has a bit of a combination of both built into it with Shark and Workshop, and that's what I was testing mainly yesterday. And at times it was slow, and at times it worked. So it it could be one that I enjoy. I do like the Kita. I wish that one of the cards went into your hand instead of on top of your deck, though. Maybe it'll be too broken. So I don't know how I feel about that, but I feel that works still really well with Coil. And I know Raya is an option, so you're able to do it again after you use the ability. But it still seems kind of slow having to do turn 3 Kita and then your turn 4 is Raya. So it really is have to be it. We have to see what the meta is going to be in order to build the most optimal blue red.
Speaking of DKP, he actually shared his recent updated list without the Hiram, if I'm not mistaken. I know people are already putting it on Dreamborn, so I have it up here. What do you think of an updated list like this? Because like you mentioned earlier, Bro was only playing like 2 Flaversham, if I'm not mistaken, right, for his Australia list. So there's already an argument where you didn't even need 4 Flaversham in your deck. By the way, Zach, so another reason why you don't limit it. No, I'm just kidding. But what do you guys think of this list? This is like the updated one right here.
Well, I played a lot of this version in set 6 towards the tail end once DKP popularized it, and I really loved the deck. I think Shark is an incredibly powerful card, and certainly worth considering in this new world. However, I think the likelihood that this deck is successful going forward leans a lot into how good is Super Goof. Because we saw a lot of the aggressive decks kind of maneuver to have 4 willpower in recent history, and that really limits the effectiveness of Super Goof. And then the other part that makes me a little worried about a deck like this is it's pretty soft to discard, and particularly Ursula too, right? And Pete. We all know that it's soft to a card like Pete, but I think both of those cards, particularly Green Steel or Green Purple discard, are going to see an increase. And when I look at this deck list, I just naturally think it's gonna struggle there, because Ursula 2 is gonna hit nearly every single time. I mean, look how many songs are in this deck. You can't really insulate yourself from that. And in the past, Blue Red could recover from early discard thanks to Hiram. This deck isn't gonna have that option.
I will say,
Yeah,
Kev,
That's fragile.
I have one build. This is like my latest build with, instead of a toy maker, it's an unconventional inventor. It's Maurice as the 4-drop.
Is it the Ruby one?
The Ruby one, yeah. And then you run a couple of Maurice's workshops as well, and Maurice's machines.
It just looks very fragile because, like you just mentioned, the Ursula is going to have a field day. Pete, I think Pete's the card to kind of worry about in this next set. Although I like Pete because it's going to punish decks like this that overcommit into like action based builds. It does nothing into like the more character based decks. It's just a three body at that point. But this is still a deck that like the DKP list specifically will not go anywhere. I also believe that Shark is just the reason why the deck exists. Shark's going to carry that meta. So we'll see if Shark gets to stick, because the Green Steel will have a lot of answers to it. Green Purple per se, I don't know exactly what answers they have, but yeah, the lack of 4 Tamatoas too, like the Happy as a Clam, I feel like needs to change. I feel like that card's still a solid 4 of, in my opinion.
Yeah, the last thing I'll say on that, if people disrespect Shark and aren't playing a lot of Zeus's, or like you said, a lot of other colors are going to struggle to out a Shark, Shark can make a big comeback. So when you look at that card and you read the text, you know how powerful it is. So I think there's still a chance for a world where Shark thrives.
I mean, Shark's just a good card, like in general. Like, and ramping into Shark, I think, is always a decent strategy. Maybe instead of drawing cards over and over again with Flaversham, you're possibly grabbing cards over and over again from your discard with Shark, and you're using that as your +1. Jonathan, you mentioned that you're trying out the Ruby Maurice, the unconventional inventor. He's a 4-cost inkable, 5 strength, 2 willpower that says, when you play this character, you may banish chosen item of yours to draw a card. And then if the banished item is named Maurice's machine, you may also banish banish chosen character with 2 strength or less. So that's an out 2 Diablo, and you get to draw a card at the same time. But I have an item list up here, if I'm not mistaken. I think I have it ready to. Yeah, here it is. I don't know if this is your list or if it's anything close to it. But what do you think of this list? It's playing stuff like Chicha, which is another way to draw cards in this deck. You guys mentioned the Kita on which you can ramp into, which is another way to kind of get your ramp going too. What do you guys think? Oh, and Workshop. You guys mentioned Workshop, which is very important. A lot of people are talking about Workshop too.
So
I think it's
So
go ahead, Shane.
I think it's very dependent on how the rest of the metagame shakes out. I think when you look at a card like Chicha, we know Chicha is very powerful. However, if people are going to be building with Diablo in mind and as many answers to Diablo as possible, then Chicha's effectiveness goes down. If there's a bunch of fire the cannons and let the storm rage ons running around, I don't have as much experience as it sounds like Jonathan does with workshop builds, but I have played against them quite a bit in the past, playing a more traditional blue-red and playing against workshop. If you don't have an answer to workshop, that's going to run away with the game. But I'm curious what the correct configuration would be.
Yeah, I was thinking about Chicha, and something I was talking about with Andrew is just that we think the next most popular color is going to be steel, and Chicha's not good against steel right now, especially with Diablo shift and just being able to hit it right away and you don't get any value. Like, you have to wait to play Chicha while having ramp at that same turn to at least get some value, and I think at that point it's just too slow. So while I would love to have Chicha, especially with Fishbone, as another way to draw cards and ramp at the same time, I don't know about in this build. I think Kita Queen could see play potentially in the item build. I just really do like Raya as a little combo piece with them because you can do it multiple times.
And
yeah, the
then
Raya is interesting.
Oh,
one thing I want to mention is there's no Scrooge in any of these decks.
Oh, I know.
I
That's
think we might be
outrageous.
disrespecting Scrooge.
I think Scrooge is
Yeah,
still
this
really
one
good.
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Scrooge is still really good. But yeah, in this deck for sure, I think it could use a little bit of Scrooge. Shout out Quantum Lorcana, by the way, awesome YouTuber. I love that he just builds decks all the time. I gotta give him credit there. Maurice's Workshop is a card that I really like. It's kind of like you said, like that card also just lets you run away with the game. Very limited item removal in some of these color combinations. So I do think Workshop has some high potential there. But yeah, I think Chicha loses to the same things that Diablo loses, Shane, like you said, and that just makes the card not as good. Do you think Bell Apprentice Inventor is gonna stick around this meta? Like now that there's no Fortis Sphere, or like do you put it in Ruby Sapphire? Is it gonna be still in Sapphire Steel maybe?
I think it's so that was one of the decks where I was playing against is a blue steel but without Hiram, and it was still running bells because you just replace Fortisphere with the other steel 1-drops, and you don't get that card draw. But with Oswald, like he high rolled me at one point where Oswald just hit so many things. So and he has Bell there to still seeing to go against aggro decks. So I think Bell can still be played, but I think only in blue steel. Blue red might be a little interesting with Tool. But I think the reason why Tool was also really good is because Hiram was another outlet to banish that. With Bell being essentially the only way, or with Maurice, maybe. It's just Bell's so good in singing 3-cost songs that I don't know if I'll see it in blue-red.
Yeah, kind of just doubling down on what Jonathan said. I think when you look at a card like Unconventional Tool, it really only functions if you're playing a card like Bell. Particularly without Hiram now. So I think there's a world where Bell is still a very playable card in both combinations, but it's going to take some time to figure it out.
Yeah, the thought that I have too is that there's like the Prince John that's from Shimmering Skies. I think he plays an item from your hand or discard for free. I'm curious to see why that one also isn't being like explored a little bit more too. Just because you have like the ability just to banish your popsicle for free, replay those items, and just kind of have a little bit extra of a card draw there. So the LeFou also reminded me of that list that once did well with the Prince John. So yeah, I'd like to see that card being explored too.
I did see a list the other day playing that Prince John. I think that was really good. Here's another list I have here. This one is by Wishes. This just looks like standard red blue without the Flaversham. I know. Okay, is there a world where you play it like this with just like no reoccurring draw engine? Like this is a lot like DKP's list, honestly. I feel like Micduck Manor becomes really good in this meta. Especially with like against the green decks. Micduck Manor is pretty nice. But outside of that, like it doesn't feel like there's much other ways to draw outside of that Prince John you're mentioning, Zach. So I think that is something to take into consideration. And then this list right here, also playing Mythic Manor by Gaming Inkwell. This one looking a little bit more like it's leaning in that direction, minus like super goofs and stuff. So do you think there's a world where you play it without super goof?
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, it's dependent on the context of what the aggressive decks look like, but there's Super Goof obviously not a good answer to cards like Daisy. If Mr. Smee makes a comeback, Super Goof excellent against Mr. Smee. So we'll see how it all shakes out. But anyone who's played Blue Red for some time knows there's so many good options, and there was a core of a deck that always included Hiram previously, that it was easy to kind of take your best 50 blue-red cards and then mix and match the rest, dependent on what you expected your opponents to be playing. So, as I mentioned earlier, when you're playing a reactive deck, you really need to have knowledge of the metagame, and we just don't have that knowledge right now. So we can look at all these lists and determine what looks good, but it's really difficult to say until you're actually playing the games. But I will say this: this is one of the few lists I believe we've seen that has Maleficent Dragon. If Blue Red is still a popular deck, particularly in your deck too, so it's so difficult to fit everything in. But if you're not dedicated to something like Maurice's Workshop, I'd like to see. I would likely lean towards playing a deck with Maleficent Dragon still.
We haven't talked much about Blue Steel before. I know, John, you're limited on time. Before we go, I just want to get your opinions on this Blue Steel list by RMB. RMB, fellow Lorcana Goons supporter, awesome player too. He developed this list right here. BS items, Hiram Band. What do you guys think of this? I feel like Blue Steel is definitely still playable, whether or not you're playing Whole New World or something. But what do you guys think? Because I know you also mentioned, John, that you're testing against an Oswald build. Do you think that's viable in the meta now?
So the Oswald is still high rolly. Like that's it. When it hits, it hits. When it doesn't hit, it's kind of bad. And this list from R&B is a little bit more consistent. Like you're kind of just going with your Blue Steel game plan. Ariel is a nice addition. Honestly, Sheriffs is really scary. So you can still play Sheriffs really easily in this deck, in this build as well. So I would maybe try to figure out how to add a couple in there. But this looks like a solid, consistent list.
This list is crazy because oh, go ahead, Shane.
Sorry, this is essentially the list I started with when the set came out. Obviously, with the addition of Hiram, and I just think, well, Hiram and Fortesphere. I think those are like, maybe this could afford to lose one of those cards, but I just don't see it. I'm just being honest. I look at this list and I just don't think it would be quite consistent enough, especially when I look at something like Scrooge. If Scrooge ever misses, you're in a lot of trouble with this deck.
Yeah, it's like Ariel not finding your song when you need to. Scrooge is like that kind of card. The ability to play Scrooge for free, though, and exerting your items, I think, is like the chef's kiss. And I do really like that kind of ability. It adds a different level of different level of like ink manipulation, essentially, because you're playing items with your ink that essentially can be used as like more ink for this specific card. So I like that design in Scrooge, but if you miss on Scrooge, it feels terrible. And like Blue Steel used to play a lot more items than this, and I'd still miss on Scrooge. So like now it's going to feel even worse.
Yeah, and we've already talked a few times now that we expect an increase in Diablo, but we're not playing Fire the Cannons or Let the Storm Rage On in this deck. which in my opinion I think makes Bell a lot worse. I think there's a shell here that could maybe work, but my first instinct looking at this list is
Yeah,
it
no
would need some
Imperial Bow to
improvement.
make things evasive either. Like I
Oh.
think there's some yeah, there needs to be some changes.
Zach on that Imperial Bow Spice. Actually, you're right, Zach. That makes that card a lot better if we're heading into like a Diablo style meta. But I think all in all, it's safe to say that like Sapphire is more than playable still. Right, like it's
Absolutely.
not like
Yeah.
dead. Okay, yeah, and that's the thing that I want to stress is that there's so many people that were just saying I'm quitting Lorcana. I can't play Flaversham, I'm quitting. I do think that's a little bit dramatic, just because you can still play a lot of these strategies. I look at this list and I think Grandma's a +1, Scrooge is potentially a +1, Tamatoa Happy as a clam is a +2, Tamatoa is so shiny is a +1, with and that's why I'm glad they left Popsicle, because if Popsicle would have been banned, these strategies, this color's buns. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you just like, what do you really grab back? You're just grabbing back items that don't really give you any extra value. And so I like that idea that Popsicle stuck around because you can still play it like this. And this seems a lot more balanced. And yeah, John, you mentioned the Sheriff, man. The Sheriff is a 9-cost uninkable that says you can pay 1 less for every item you have on board. He quests for 4. He's a 5/9 body, and he has support too. So he's a pretty hefty body. So I do think that's something you guys might want to consider playing in your Sapphire item-based strategies, because we didn't even see people playing Sheriff in that blue-red deck we saw, that item blue-red deck we just looked at. And I think that's very powerful. I think that in the future, whether or not you're playing against a discard or stuff like that, like we're just gonna see a big meta shift in like people's priorities. And one of the things about Sapphire, is that it's always felt like a very reactive color, like you were talking about, Shane. Like you develop your Sapphire based deck, depending on how the meta is shaping, kind of like Ruby Amethyst. Ruby Amethyst it's always the worst deck in the beginning, and then the meta gets established, and all of a sudden, like boom, you just play Ruby Am the way you want to. And that's what I really like about that. So it'll be refreshing to see Sapphire decks do that as well. Personally, when I saw the ban list and I realized that it was in effect also on Lorcanito, I was excited to play again. I'll be real with you. Like, it felt very fun to play a bunch of decks without necessarily telling myself, well, I need to play the 4 outs to Hiram. You know what I mean? This deck in particular looks really scary to me because there's only 1 brawl target. So the moment like I play Ruby Amethyst and I have 4 brawls in my deck, it's like, I'm kind of in a bad position because there's nothing really to brawl here. Which is really interesting because like I've been so accustomed to keeping Brawl in my hand in my opening mulligan against Sapphire decks because you need the out to Flaversham. So it is a little bit refreshing. I think it's going to pivot the game in a very positive direction at least. But that's just my opinion. I'm gonna play the game regardless. This game's so fun. So, but like I think fact of the matter is that like Sapphire is still more than playable. There's gonna be some strategies around. Before we let you guys go, I just want to get your opinion on discard, because I know, Shane, you mentioned earlier that possibly Diablo and Whole New World could hit the ban hammer in the future. I personally hate Whole New World too. Like, I think that that card is so polarizing. Like, you just can't do anything. You just sit there and lose when they have it. And when they have them back to back to back, which is really silly. And then Prince John. I think Prince John is a very good card. I like Diablo for the sake of like Emerald decks having a good draw engine, and if they make more outs to Diablo, that's very easy to do. Whereas Prince John, the ward ability on Prince John, in my opinion, is very problematic because it's a lot easier to make outs to a card like Diablo rather than out cards that out stuff like ward. There's very few mechanics in the game that out stuff like ward. We have the green Mother Gothel, and your opponent has to choose. We have Lady Tremaine, Beaking Undisputed. There's nothing in steel. Oh, actually, there is stuff in steel, right? There's some random steel cards that say your opponent chooses to deal 4 damage to their card. But yeah, what do you guys think of discard as like the new tier 0 deck?
Yeah, I know Zach loves it.
So yeah, Lemon Lime Discard is a deck that I've just been playing with and testing with since the recent bans of Hiram and Fortisphere. It's it's an interesting spot. Again, Pete is just a crazy card, the steel one. So that's probably the deck's worst nightmare. Outside of that, you have a lot of like removal tools. You have Under the Sea for big board wipes, Kita to blanket everything if in case you need to quest out. And on top of all that, you just have Prince John and Diablo, the best uninkable Emerald draw engines that exist. I do want to add, though, that Diablo does cost 3 cards to kind of effectively play. And in order for it to kind of break even, you do have to draw 3 off of his ability. So it does create pressure, and it's a very hard card to answer right away. However, if it only draws 1 card, you've essentially lost 2 cards for committing the card. and in order for it to break even, you're gonna have to draw at least like 2 or 3 cards off of it. It's a card that for sure will cause problems, but I think Prince John, it has a bigger target on its head, in my opinion.
Yeah, the sorry, Shane. The card that's for me that allowed me to consistently beat discard was Hiram. And now without Hiram, it becomes a lot more difficult. I don't think Diablo is as much of an issue as Prince John is, in my opinion. Prince John not being able to, like, the only way I can really interact is putting out a big Sisu, or B prep, and to get to that point, like, I need to have the shift, but they have Diablo to get rid of my baby Sisu. So like, it's I have to get to the 7/8 ink essentially, and by that time they probably have already discarded most of my hand.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a very powerful strategy. There's no doubt about that. And I know we're looking at Dale's deck here, green steel, but I think green purple is going to be very strong, and having all the different options for a Diablo shift. And when you look at this deck, say you have 4 brawls in your deck, right? That's the maximum amount of removal you have besides sweeper effects, whether it's sweeper or whether it's B prep or Sisu, excuse me. If your opponent has an early Diablo and then they play an Ursula, like, sure, you're probably forced to kill the Diablo, although there has been points in time where, given that decision, I've chosen to brawl the Ursula. They just get it snowballs. It's a snowball effect that can be really, really difficult to interact with. And then obviously you can get Prince John in the mix. And like Jonathan said, if you don't have that sweeper at the very end of all that discard, the game's effectively over. And then sometimes you do have the sweeper, but they have 5 cards in their hand, and you have 0. So that's what's made this deck good historically. But Hiram very much did keep it in check. And I think we're going to see a significant rise in this type of deck, whether it's green purple or green steel. And I haven't really played the mirror too much myself, but I have heard that that's not a particularly fun experience, and it's something that we could certainly see an increase of in the near future.
Well, yeah, man. I have to agree on all those points. I think Diablo's a problem. I think Prince John's a problem. Yeah, I've had to make a decision between brawling the Ursula or the Diablo. And one of the crazy things too now is that you have cards like Pete in the metagame. So even if you have one of those board wipes, like Be Prepared, they just Pete it out of, so stop that from happening. But yeah, I want to thank you guys for your time. That's going to be all the time we have for this week's episode of Quest with a Guest. We're here with Shane Downey, Jonathan Martinez, Zach Stone, Team Goons. Really appreciate you guys for being here and listening to our thoughts on the future of the metagame. I hope you guys got some information you need, and any deck lists that I shared here we'll put in the description below. Shane, I know we can find you on Twitter at Shaners Direct. I'll go ahead and put that link as well if you guys want to follow his Lorcana journey. Jonathan Martinez, are you on Twitter at all? Or are you going to be you have anywhere people can follow you?
Not really, just Instagram, BlueJam is my handle, but that's about it.
There you go, Jonathan. BlueJam
and Discord.
Yeah. There you go. Or Discord. We're all in the Lorcana Discord, so you'll see BlueJam around. And Zach Stone, anything you want to say before we call it a day today?
Well, guys, this was our Quest with a Guest. Thank you guys for being here, a part of this amazing episode. I love to always chat with my teammates, but this is something that we wanted to do because these are red-blue like stands for as long as I've known John, and most of as long as I've known Shane, except for the one time you played Green Steel Discard.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm looking at the deck list. It still looks pretty good.
There you go. So it's amazing to be able to chat with you guys and just kind of get the into your guys' like mindset about the Hiram ban, because these are like avid blue-red players, as much as a blue-red player as I feel like Sailor and DKP are, and they deserve their flowers too. So thank you guys for sharing your thoughts, and to all you goons that are still watching us, we'll see you goons next time.